Tumblty's name has been connected with the whole Ripper murders.
And they believe that Tumblety could have been Jack the Ripper.
For a lot of people now, he's the favourite Ripper suspect.
For over a century, Jack the Ripper haunted the imagination of millions, becoming the ultimate symbol of an unsolvable mystery. But what if I told you that after nearly 140 years, the world's most notorious cold case might finally have an answer? In 2025, historians and scientists claim to have identified Jack the Ripper conclusively as Aaron Kosminski, a Polish barber from London's Whitechapel district. But can this claim withstand scrutiny? Or does the shadow of doubt still linger over history's darkest mystery? Let's dive deep into the evidence. So, who was this guy that turned Victorian London upside down? Jack the Ripper wasn't just a killer, he was a phantom, a name whispered in fear through the cramped, grimy streets of Whitechapel. Back in 1888, this East End district was a melting pot of poverty, where gas lamps flickered over cobblestones and life was cheap. That autumn, a series of murders hit hard. 5 women, known as the Canonical Five, were found dead, their bodies slashed and mutilated in ways that still make your stomach turn. Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, their names are etched into history, victims of a killer who seemed to know anatomy like a pro. These weren't random stabs in the dark. The Ripper cut throats with precision, often removing organs, livers, kidneys, even a uterus, like he was performing some twisted surgery. The press went nuts, dubbing him Jack after taunting letters, maybe fake, maybe not, started showing up. One, the "From Hell" letter, came with half a human kidney. Talk about a sick calling card. Police were scrambling, chasing shadows through alleys, but the guy was a ghost. No fingerprints, no DNA back then, just witness sketches of a man in a top hat and theories that piled up like old newspapers. Whitechapel itself was a character in this nightmare. Overcrowded tenements, gin-soaked pubs, and women turning to prostitution just to eat. It was the perfect hunting ground. Some say the Ripper was a local, blending into the chaos. Others think he was an outsider, slipping in and out. The murders stopped as suddenly as they began after November 1888, leaving behind a question mark that's lasted 137 years. Why does it still grip us? Maybe it's the brutality, or the fact that he got away with it, mocking the cops with every step. By 2025, we're still obsessed, and that's where this new claim comes in, tying a name to the terror. But to get why it matters, let's meet the man they're pointing at. Curious about who could pull off such horrors and vanish? Let's step into the life of Aaron Kosminski, a barber with a dark shadow trailing him. Aaron Kosminski, the man behind the mask. Meet Aaron Kosminski, not exactly the guy you'd invite for tea. Born in 1865 in Kłodawa, Poland, he was a Jewish immigrant who landed in London's East End in the early 1880s, escaping pogroms and persecution. Picture him, a wiry guy with a scruffy beard, scissors in hand, working as a barber in Whitechapel. Sounds harmless, right? But this is where it gets murky. Kosminski wasn't just snipping hair, he was a suspect in the Ripper case way back in 1888, and now in 2025, he's the star of this supposed breakthrough. Kosminski's life wasn't a picnic. He lived in squalor, bouncing between rundown rooms near the murder sites, sometimes just streets away from where the bodies dropped. Police noticed him early on, and a bigwig, Sir Melville Macnaghten, wrote in 1894 that Kosminski had a great hatred of women, especially prostitutes, and strong homicidal tendencies. That's not a glowing review. Witnesses described a scruffy Polish Jew lurking around, and while descriptions varied, Kosminski's name stuck. He wasn't arrested, though. Lack of hard evidence kept him free, but the suspicion never faded. Then things got weirder. By 1891, he was unraveling, threatening his sister with a knife, hearing voices, refusing to bathe. His family had him locked up in Colney Hatch Asylum, where doctors labeled him with chronic mania and homicidal delusions. He'd scream about religious visions and fling chairs, a far cry from the quiet barber he once was. Eventually, he ended up in Leavesden Asylum, dying in 1919 from gangrene. Pretty grim stuff. But here's the kicker. His job as a barber, maybe even a barber surgeon, could explain the Ripper's knife skills. Back then, barbers sometimes did minor surgeries, think tooth pulling or bloodletting, so he might have known his way around a blade. Fast forward to 2025, and historian Russell Edwards says Kosminski's not just a suspect, he's the guy. Edwards points to his mental decline, his Whitechapel address, and that old police hunch, tying it all to new evidence we'll unpack soon. But was Kosminski really a monster hiding in plain sight? His asylum records paint a violent, unstable man, yet no one saw him red-handed. It's a chilling thought, a barber, trimming hair by day, stalking the streets by night. The 2025 claim hinges on proving it, and that's where a certain shawl comes in. Wondering how a barber from 1888 gets nailed in 2025? It all boils down to one bloodstained clue that's stirring up a storm. The shawl that started it all. Now let's talk about the star of this 2025 reveal, a silken wool shawl, paisley patterned with red and brownish black stains, that's been sitting quietly for over a century. This isn't just any old rag, it's supposedly the key to unmasking Jack the Ripper. The story goes that it was found next to Catherine Eddowes, the fourth victim, on September 30th, 1888, in Mitre Square. Eddowes was brutalized, throat slashed, face carved up, and her kidney taken, yet this shawl, allegedly hers, survived the carnage. Fast forward to 2007, and Russell Edwards, our historian hero, snags it at an auction, kicking off a wild ride. Edwards says this shawl's a time capsule, holding DNA from both Eddowes and her killer. Picture it, a delicate fabric about 8 feet long with faded flowers and dark splotches, blood and, other stuff. He hands it over to Harri Louhelainen, a molecular biologist from John Moores University, who starts poking around in 2014. They use fancy tech, think infrared scans and microscopes, to spot stains. Blood from Eddowes, confirmed by kidney cell traces, she'd had Bright's disease, and semen, which they linked to the killer. In 2019, their findings hit the Journal of Forensic Sciences, claiming a 100% DNA match to Aaron Kosminski via his descendants. By 2025, Edwards doubles down in his book Jack the Ripper, the definitive reveal, calling it case closed. But let's rewind. How'd this shawl even get here? Legend says a cop, Acting Sergeant Amos Simpson, grabbed it from the scene as a grim souvenir for his wife. She didn't want it, can you blame her? So it got passed down through family hands, untouched until it surfaced decades later. Edwards tracked it through auction records and voila, he's got a relic. The DNA part's where it gets juicy. They matched mitochondrial DNA, which tracks maternal lines, to Kosminski's living relatives. He argues it's too specific to be random. Kosminski lived nearby. The shawl's got his mark. End of story. Here's the catch, though. Not everyone's buying it. The shawl's a lone wolf. No police reports from 1888 mention it, which is odd for a murder scene crawling with cops. Could it have been dropped later? Contaminated over time? Edwards swears it's legit, pointing to its condition and stains as proof it's been frozen in time. In 2025, he's pushing this hard. TV interviews, book tours, even calls for a new inquest. For him, it's not just fabric, it's a window into that bloody night. But is it really the smoking gun, or are we chasing ghosts again? The science behind it's next, and trust me, it's a roller coaster. Science under the microscope. So, we've got this shawl with blood and semen stains. Pretty creepy, right? But how do you turn a 137-year-old rag into proof that Aaron Kosminski was Jack the Ripper? That's where the science comes in, and it's a wild ride. Back in 2014, Harri Louhelainen, the biologist Russell Edwards tapped, started digging into the shawl's secrets. He used a toolbox of high-tech tricks, infrared imagery to spot stains, spectrophotometry to analyze their makeup, and microscopes to zoom in on tiny clues. What he found was a mix of blood, linked to Catherine Eddowes through kidney cells, and semen, which he traced to Kosminski's family line. By 2019, this hit the Journal of Forensic Sciences, with Edwards shouting 100% match from the rooftops in 2025. Let's break it down. The big player here is mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA, stuff you inherit from your mom. It's tough, lasts forever in old samples, and Louhelainen matched it to Kosminski's descendants. They also used YISTR DNA, which tracks the male line, to narrow it down further. Sounds airtight, doesn't it? Edwards says it's like finding a genetic fingerprint, especially since Kosminski lived a stone's throw from the murders. Louhelainen even called it the most advanced study On the Ripper case, using UV light to confirm the stains weren't just dirt or Victorian ketchup. The shawl's age and condition backed it up, untouched for decades, a perfect little time capsule. But here's where it gets messy. mDNA isn't a unique ID, it's shared by tons of people in the same maternal line. Imagine it like a family recipe. It can rule you out if it doesn't match, but if it does, you're just one of many suspects. In 1888 Whitechapel, with its packed immigrant neighborhoods, how many Polish Jews might have had similar mtDNA? Critics say the study didn't account for that. Then there's the semen, tricky to pin down after so long, and the YSTR results weren't fully published. In August 2024, the journal slapped an expression of concern on the paper because the raw data was missing. No data, no dice. Science demands transparency, and this was a red flag. Edwards fights back, saying the tech was cutting edge and the match too precise to ignore. But the cracks are there: contamination risks, shaky methods, and a sample size of one shawl. It's like building a case on a single crumb. By 2025, this science is the backbone of the solved claim, yet it's got experts split down the middle. Is it a breakthrough or a bust? The debate's heating up, and the skeptics are ready to pounce. Convinced by the DNA wizardry, or maybe not? Let's hear why some big brains think this whole thing's a house of cards. Voices of doubt, why experts aren't sold. Okay, Edwards and his shawl have the spotlight in 2025, but not everyone's clapping. The science might sound slick, but a chorus of experts is yelling, "Hold up!" First up, there's Turi King, an archaeological geneticist from the University of Leicester. She's blunt. The shawl's story is fishy. No police logs from 1888 mention it. Odd, since cops were all over Mitre Square after Edow's murder. Was it really there, or did someone drop it later? King says, without proof, it's a relic with no roots, and 137 years of handling could have smeared it with anyone's DNA. Then there's the contamination angle. That shawl wasn't sealed in a vault. It bounced through family attics, auction houses, and who knows where before Edwards got it. Imagine how many hands touched it, coughed on it, or, gross, sweated on it. Geneticists like Walter Parson from Innsbruck Medical University call the 2019 study unpublishable nonsense. They argue the mtDNA match is too broad. Hundreds of EastEnders could have fit the profile. And the missing raw data? That's a science sin, Kim Rossmo from Texas State University piles on, pointing to tunnel vision and confirmation bias. Edwards wanted Kosminski, so he saw Kosminski. Ripperologists, the die-hard fans of this case, aren't all in either. Katie Charlwood, a historian, wonders if one guy even did all 5 murders. Stride's killing was less messy, almost like a different hand. The shawl ties Kosminski to Edus, sure, but what about the others? No evidence links him to Nichols or Kelly, and that's a gap Edwards brushes off. Critics say he's cherry-picking, building a narrative on shaky ground. Even the barber surgeon idea gets flack. Kosminski cut hair, not bodies, and there's no record he ever trained beyond a razor and comb. By 2025, this pushback's loud. Forbes, New Scientist, and Science ran pieces tearing into the study. Headlines like Jack the Ripper DNA, unpublishable nonsense, don't mince words. Edwards fires back, saying skeptics are stuck in the past, ignoring modern forensics. But the doubt lingers. Is this a case of science proving history, or history bending science? The jury's out, and it's keeping the mystery alive. With experts throwing shade, you might wonder what the public thinks, especially those with skin in the game. Let's see how 2025 is shaking things up. The push for justice in 2025. Fast forward to March 2025, and this Kosminski claim isn't just a nerd fight, it's hitting real people. Descendants of the victims, like Catherine Eddowes' family, are stepping up. One relative told CBS News they want a new inquest, calling it a form of justice. Imagine that, your great-great-grandma's killer named after all these years. It's not about punishment. Kosminski's long gone, but closure. Edwards is all in, pushing for official recognition in his book and TV spots, like a February chat on Today Australia. He's framing it as a win for history, a chance to rewrite the ending. The public's eating it up. GB News and Newsweek splashed headlines like Jack the Ripper's identity confirmed. Clickbait gold. Social media's buzzing too. X posts range from finally justice to this is BS, prove it. True crime fans are split. Some see it as the holy grail, others as a cash grab. Edwards' book Jack the Ripper, The Definitive Reveal, flew off shelves and he's milking the hype. Think podcasts, documentaries, the works. He's even got descendants of Kosminski's family in the mix, some quietly nodding, others dodging the spotlight. Legally, it's a long shot. The UK doesn't reopen cold cases this old unless there's a living suspect, but the pressure's on. Victim families argue it's symbolic. Name the guy, close the file. Ripper tours in Whitechapel are adapting too, with guides now hyping the Kosminski shawl angle to tourists. It's a weird vibe, part vindication, part circus. And get this, some folks jokingly suggest Kosminski's ghost owes an apology. By 2025, it's less about the lab and more about the legacy. People want answers, even if they're messy. But is Kosminski really the only name in the hat? Let's peek at the other shadows who've haunted this case. Other suspects, other shadows. Kosminski's got the 2025 crown, but he's not the only one who's worn it. Back in the day, police eyed a roster of suspects, none with a shawl, but plenty with motive. Take Montague Druitt, a barrister who drowned himself in the Thames weeks after Kelly's murder. Cops like McNaughton thought his suicide screamed guilt. Why off yourself unless you're cornered? No hard proof, just timing, and he's faded from the spotlight. Then there's Michael Ostrog, a con man and thief with a rap sheet longer than a Victorian novel. Police pegged him as unstable, but he was more talk than action, no blood on his hands. Francis Tumblety's another wild card, an American quack doctor who hated women and fled London mid-Ripper spree. He collected uteruses, yeah, you read that right, and had a temper. Circumstantial, sure, but juicy. Compared to them, Kosminski stands out. He lived in Whitechapel, had mental cracks, and now that DNA hook. Druitt's a ghost, Ostrog's a crook, Tumblety's a nut, but none have forensic juice. The shawl gives Kosminski an edge, flawed or not, and 2025's betting on it. Why him over them? Location, profile, and that one piece of evidence, however shaky, set him apart. The others are footnotes, Kosminski's the headline. But it's not a slam dunk, those shadows still linger.